Hello and welcome to Down to Earth with Terry Virts, where we talk about what matters down here on planet Earth. Today, I had several guests that had to reschedule, unfortunately, so I'm going to do a solo podcast, but there's a couple of issues that have really been hot and heavy in the news, and this is a really important and very, very good one. It really grabbed my attention. I'm going to do it kind of from an interesting angle, so stick with me. And as you know, I like to talk about what matters down here on planet Earth, and nothing is important in some ways than politics, more important than politics. As I like to say, it's not about the rocket science, it's about the political science, because that's how we live. That's what determines if you live in a good country or a bad country, or if your life is good or bad. It's how we make these decisions down here on the planet. And so we're kind of moving towards this conflict between democracies and authoritarianism. I think a lot of people see that now. I've been warning about this for the last 6 or 7 years, but the things that are happening in Russia and China versus the things that are happening in the West are really important. We need to get our act together in the West and in democracies to make sure that there are not bigger future issues. And so with that in mind, there are more types of government than just Western, American, Canadian, French style democracies, or, you know, Vladimir Putin and President Xi, old school democracies, 1984 kind of authoritarian regimes. There are some other ones. And in fact, over the last couple of decades, we've had our military in the Middle East fighting the Taliban and caliphates and the Islamic State and these kind of authoritarian, really religious states. And I wanted to talk about that because that type of government is another issue. And so there's one, I just was going through some stuff on the internet, and I found one that had codified their beliefs. And these are just some of the tenets. And I want you to read through or kind of hear some of the tenets of their form of government. Of course, the foundation is God, their belief in their God only. Of course, it's their God. And all of their rules of government, everything comes from him, comes from God. Everything is based on that. They want religious instruction and scripture throughout the schools and every government institution and government buildings. They want that pervasive. They want to avoid multilateral or other types of multinational organizations. They almost want to be a hermit nation just amongst themselves, kind of like North Korea to a certain extent. They want religious schooling to occur without interference or regulation from the government. They don't want sex education for kids. They forbid teaching any type of human relationships other than natural man, natural born woman. There's no other marriage other than natural born man, natural born woman. Of course, they condemn homosexuality or any of the other alternative lifestyles. They want to forbid contraception, not only education, but also distribution. They want to rewrite history so that it's told completely from a centric viewpoint, from their point of view, only promoting the good things that they've done and not the bad things, kind of like the way Vladimir Putin talks about Russian history. They want to put religious institutions above the law. Of course, they're above the government. Religion is more important than the government. They want to restrict access to divorce. All abortions, of course, at any stage for any reason are illegal. They want to allow they want their armed partisans to come to elections to make sure that everything's going well at the elections, basically to threaten people who might vote otherwise. They want to restrict immigration. Of course, there's an immigration for people who don't look like them. They want to avoid. And they want to make foreign policy based on what their scripture says, as it was written thousands of years ago. And they basically reject democracy. And so I was in the military. I served in the Middle East fighting against governments like this. But unfortunately, this is not an Islamic caliphate. This is not the Islamic State. This is not the Taliban. This comes from a place that rhymes with Exis. This is the Texas GOP Republican platform as it was just approved. I just went to their website. I downloaded the final document, and I spent the weekend reading through this 40-page document. It was very painful. It is actually something that's being proposed. It's only a platform. These are not laws yet. At least some of them are not. But this is what an entire majority party in my home state of Texas wants to do. And I'm going to talk about some of the details. I broke it down so you don't have to. But I'm saying these things as I'm a Christian myself. I supported Ronald Reagan. I think George H.W. Bush was one of our best presidents of all time. He's the most qualified man. I admire him immensely. I am the farthest thing from a Democrat or a liberal, and I don't support a lot of what the Democratic Party is doing. I support some things, but certainly not all by a long shot. So keep that in mind. This is not bleeding heart California liberal coming at you. This is a Texas Christian gun owner that's just wants to expose the evil caliphate of Texas that this illegitimate, in my mind, Republican Party is trying to spew and trying to implement in our great state. Like I said, the first words of this document are, we believe in God, and everything that follows comes from God. Of course, it's their God. It's the Christian God. And people who don't believe in him don't seem to be welcome very much. They specifically say, we support prayer, the Bible, and the 10 Commandments being returned to schools, courthouses, and other government buildings. There's nothing wrong with having a 10 Commandments in a court or something like that, but they're clearly trying to make that, go overboard right up front. And this is unbelievable. This is treasonous. Texas retains the right to secede from the United States. And the Texas legislature, they're asking for a referendum to come on to secede from the Union next year. They want that referendum in 2023, so Texas secedes from the Union. I swore an oath to uphold the Constitution and to keep the Union together. That's treasonous. The state legislature, they want the Texas state legislature to have their own electoral college. Now, we have this electoral college for the president. It's confusing. Nobody other than Americans even knows why we have it. Of course, the reason why we have it is so that the smaller southern states in the 1700s could keep slavery. It was a weird way to make sure that South Carolina didn't get outvoted by Georgia or by New York or Massachusetts. And so it's this weird thing that was there designed to maintain slavery. It's time for that thing to go. Time and time again, the American people vote for one person and someone else gets elected because of this weird electoral college. They're trying to do the same thing in Texas so that rural white counties have a lot more power than they do now. And diverse cities like San Antonio, Houston, Dallas lose a lot of power. So they're trying to implement this minority rule system in one of many ways. This is just one of many ways that they're trying to do that. It's completely racist and it's blatant. They want to abolish the Environmental Protection Agency because clearly we don't need to protect the environment. This is just so insane to say that, because clearly companies will do the right thing and make sure that we all have clean water and clean air. And they want to repeal the Endangered Species Act. Folks, climate change, on my scale of threats, climate change is bad. We need to work to fix it. We don't want to have more extreme weather. Climate change is going to benefit Russia a lot. That's another reason why we don't want it. It's a strategic benefit in their favor. As all that frozen tundra warms up, it's going to benefit Russia. But species loss is forever. And so climate change is going to end in a couple hundred years. We're running out of dinosaurs. We're not making any more fossil fuel. So that's eventually going to end in a few centuries. But when you lose species, that's forever. And they're promoting losing more species that will hurt millennia of humanity in the future. They want to have flood control for places like Houston when hurricanes come, but they don't want to control the climate change that causes the floods. It's like they want to have really expensive hospital treatment for COVID that costs $100,000 or more, but they don't want to take a $5.99 vaccine to prevent it from happening to begin with. They're doing the same thing for climate change. They support anybody sitting for the Texas bar exam. So they think anybody in Texas should be a lawyer, regardless of educational background. So you don't need to go to law school to be a lawyer. That sounds like a good idea. They want to repeal the minimum wage. They want to repeal Dodd-Frank's. They want to repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, the Lacey Act. They basically want to undo a lot of the basic financial protections, things that are designed to prevent another global financial crisis. They want just total free market, because clearly Wall Street will do the right thing. And the banks and investment banks and Goldman Sachs, they're going to do the right thing when it comes to money. They don't need to be regulated. Just let the free market go. I'm being facetious. That's insane. Of course, we need important. We need probably more regulation because we've allowed banks to become too big to fail. And then when they fail, the taxpayers have to jump in and bail them out. That's called a moral hazard. It means when you have to pay for the risk that someone else assumed and got the benefit from. That's what happened in 2008. And that's what the Texas Republican Party wants to happen again. They don't want governments to be able to say this is an essential activity during an emergency. So if there's a pandemic or hurricane or whatever, they don't want the government to have the authority to say, hey, these are important. We have to keep these open, because clearly the free market will decide that on its own. They basically want to abolish all taxes. I went through pages and pages of all the tax ideas they had. There just are no taxes that they want. They want to either abolish them. They want to abolish the amendment in the US Constitution that allows an income tax. Property taxes are gone. All kinds of business taxes are gone. Look, I don't want to pay taxes. I work hard to try and minimize the number of taxes the amount of taxes that I pay. But I realize that I live in a society that needs taxes. We need schools, we need roads, we need a military, we need police. And the Republican Party in Texas wants to abolish all taxes. So we'll just be a third world country, I guess. They only want bonds to be approved by a 2/3 majority, and only if 20% of registered voters, caps, whatever. They're just trying to make it very difficult to have bonds. In other words, for the government to raise money for schools and roads and things that they need. They want to abolish the Federal Reserve. I'm just going to let that float out there for a second. Clearly, these are not Harvard Business School graduates who wrote this thing. I guess we could be like Turkey. Turkey has a great president who decides what happens with their interest rates, and that's worked out well for their economy. Erdogan is exactly the kind of president that is in the mold of Trump, so that must be what they want. They want to abolish the Federal Reserve. They oppose any attempt to regulate homeschooling or the curriculum of private or religious schools. So they want parents and Christian schools to be able to teach whatever they want without any regulation from the government. That's a recipe for disaster for these kids. These kids need to know reading, writing, arithmetic. They need to know history. They need to have some education in arts and physical education. There's just a certain minimum standard that kids need to get when they're in school to have opportunity. And the Republican Party wants to take that away in the state of Texas. They demand that the state legislature prohibits teaching sex education. So these teenagers in 9th, 10th, 11th, 7th, and 8th grade are going to be a lot better off not being taught the specific biological functions of sex and sexually transmitted disease and pregnancy and just basic stuff that we all learned in health class. And it's something that everybody needs to learn. And most parents are not biologists or medical doctors, and they can't teach them those specific things about how our plumbing works. Kids need to know that, and Republicans want to prevent that from being taught. The only sex education, I said that wrong. They do have one thing that can be taught, and that's abstinence. So they want the public schools to teach kids, hey, just don't have sex. And I guess until you're married, I guess that'll be part of their abstinence thing. In fact, they specifically call out Florida. They want more comprehensive than Florida, prohibiting the instruction in sexual orientation and gender identity. Of course, kids are not allowed to be taught about that. And look, I don't want my kindergartner learning about all those things, but there comes a point in middle school and certainly in high school where it's appropriate, and kids need to be exposed to the way people are and what life is. And we can't just keep our kids in a box, isolated box. So they want all reproductive health services out of the schools. They don't ever want nurses talking about anything having to do with reproductive health. They they specifically call out for the curriculum. It was pretty interesting. They had a bunch of lines for like for math and for history and whatever, and then for science it just said they should teach science, and there was no words to talk about science, which of course the GOP doesn't believe in. At least some part of it is very anti-science. So they especially want, and I'm quoting, the contrast between freedom and the tyrannical history of socialism and communism throughout history, because communism has been around throughout history. Not. So King George in the UK was not socialist or communist, but we fought them twice. The Civil War was not about democracy against socialism or communism. It was about race. It was about slavery. The Spanish-American War, World War I, Nazis, the Empire of Japan, Iraq and Afghanistan. We fought lots of enemies throughout history that were not socialist or communist. I guess we need to warn students of the evils of Norway and Switzerland and other socialist countries, how awful it is there. But again, this is just ideological nonsense. They want students to learn about the humanity of the preborn child. I don't have any problem with explaining pregnancy. And look, this is what a unborn baby looks like. I think that's cool. I think high school 10th grade biology students should be learning that. But this is not the point of what they're trying to do. They want to abolish the Department of Education in the United States Department of Education. I think states should have some minimum requirements and guidelines and help that every American kid should learn certain things. The Department of Education makes sense. In fact, the way that we're going to get out of this disaster and this division that we're in is through better education. They want to put more handguns in schools. They want teachers to be armed. Now, I can understand if you're a rural community and the police are 30 minutes away, I can understand having some, having the football coach armed or whatever, having some teachers with concealed carry permits. But in inner cities, do you really want tens and hundreds of thousands of teachers armed? First of all, who's the guarantee that the teacher's not going to snap? Who's the guarantee that some smart aleck kid who's being awful and terribly behaved pushes the teacher a little bit too far? Of course, that's going to happen. And if you've ever been in at least one of these Texas high schools or junior highs, man, these football players can take out the smaller teachers, no problem. I've talked to teachers, they're terrified. These boys outweigh them by 100 pounds. They could pick them up and snap them in half. Do you want them to snap the teacher in half and then have his gun? What the Republican Party wants is more shootouts in schools. And what I think we should have is less guns so that there are less shootings in schools. They don't want universities taught anything other than conservative Christian dogma, nothing about racism or any of America's problematic past or diversity and inclusion and all that stuff. And look, I am not woke. I am not a fan of woke, but I want my kids to hear it in college. And I want them to go, that doesn't make sense because of X, Y, Z. I want them to push back on teachers that are trying to teach them horse hockey. I don't want their First Amendment rights of the teachers to freedom of speech to be abridged. I want teachers to have freedom of speech to talk about ideas. And I want kids to have wisdom and critical thinking skills to think through these things, not just be afraid of all these ideas. They want to abolish all federal welfare programs. That'll be helpful for America's poor. All federal welfare programs should be abolished. They want to abolish Obamacare. Those millions of people that now have insurance, I guess, just won't have insurance. Insurance companies can not insure you if you have a pre-existing condition. We'll just abolish all that. Homosexuality is specifically signaled out for being an abnormal lifestyle choice. People aren't just gay, it's a choice and it's abnormal. They're going back to 1950s here. They think that all Confederate monuments should be restored and also protected so that we should have monuments to the men who fought to protect slavery. That should be codified and we should be glorifying slavery is basically what they're saying. They want to acknowledge that the church is a God-ordained institution. So there's no issues here with the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment, I don't think. Here I'm quoting, they want acknowledgement that the church is a God-ordained institution with a sphere of authority separate from that of civil government, and thus the church is not to be regulated, controlled, or taxed. Now, there's been some documentaries recently. There's some of these mega churches are making millions of dollars selling music, selling books. It's an untaxed, very profitable business that leads to business jets for the church leaders. And so they want to make sure that doesn't get taxed. And look, I've have tithed to churches. I think that the local church should be, basically able to operate as an untaxed thing. I get that for most churches, but there comes a point where the mega churches today in America are just fleecing taxpayers is all they're doing. We affirm God's biblical design for marriage and sexual behavior between one biological man and one biological woman, which is the foundation for all Western civilization. We oppose homosexual regardless of state of origin. So there you have it. The Republican Party affirms God's biblical design. So it's a Christian Bible that they're talking about. That is the platform of the Texas Republican Party. They want to get rid of no-fault divorce, and they want to have the government support covenant marriage and extend, basically make divorce more difficult. They want to repeal all campaign contributions. So they're okay with having lots of dirty money in politics, but not that that's okay. I guess that's a God-ordained thing that rich people are allowed to influence. Are allowed to buy influence. That's what the Texas Republican Party stands for. They're very much against campaign finance reform. Unbelievable. More than anything, they want to secede. They want Texas to secede from the Union. I swore an oath to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and secession, in my mind, is an enemy of the United States. That's why we fought the Civil War. And they're proposing treason. They're proposing sedition in their proposal of secession. They want that to be on a ballot next year in the state of Texas, in the great state of Texas. They want Texas to be an independent nation. This is a very short line. There shall be no gun-free zones in Texas. That's simple. I can understand that. You don't need a lawyer to interpret that. So I guess prisoners should be able to exercise their Second Amendment rights. I mean, it's a God-given right. When you're a prisoner, you don't just give away all your rights. So prisoners in Huntsville, right here near Houston, should be able to have the gun to protect themselves. There's probably nobody that needs protecting more than a prisoner in some of those prisons. That's dangerous in there. No gun-free zones in Texas, not in the state courthouse, not in the schools, not in malls, not in churches, nowhere. Everybody can carry everywhere, and that would make us a lot safer. They want to defund and abolish the Department or Agency of Internal Revenue Service. So I guess the government's not going to collect tax. Education. So we'll just let education be done by homeschooling. Housing and urban development. So people who need housing help won't get it. The Department of Energy. Energy is not a big issue for America. We'll just let the free market decide what our energy policy is, which, by the way, means we'll be buying wind and solar from China unrestricted without a Department of Energy. That's the direction we're going. Labor, Interior, Transportation Security Administration. We're not going to have guards at the airport. That hasn't been a problem in the past. ATF, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms won't be regulated. This is unbelievable. The Federal Drug Administration, Food and Drug Administration, the Centers for Disease Control, the FDIC, we won't have bank deposits insured. OSHA, and any other agency or department not authorized by Congress. This one hits a little close to home. Apparently they want NASA abolished, because I've read the Constitution. There's nothing in there about NASA. So according to the Texas GOP, we should abolish NASA. I'm just going to read that again. They want to abolish the IRS, education, energy, TSA, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, OSHA. We won't have people making sure that workplaces are safe, and NASA and the FAA. The FAA is not in the Constitution either. So we'll just let pilots fly wherever they want. There won't be any regulation. That's insane. That is insane. They want poll watchers trained. Of course, they have to be trained because the government wouldn't let you do something unless you were trained, from anywhere in the state of Texas with local party or candidate approval. Poll watchers should be able to go to the polls and watch. Now, of course, they can be armed because that's a right now from what the Texas GOP wants and what the Supreme Court gave us. You're going to be able to go watch over polls. Now, how's that going to be? Do you think they're going to have certain race and demographic of folks coming with their guns to watch over other race and demographic of folks as they vote? Will that be intimidating? Is that what the Soviet Union did? Is that what North Korea does when they force you to vote? Speaking of voting, the Texas GOP wants the Voting Rights Act of 1965, codified and updated in 1973, to be repealed and not reauthorized. They want to do away with the Voting Rights Act. They really do want to go back in time because things were so much better in the 1950s and 60s in America, especially when it came to voting rights for Black people and Hispanic people and Asian people. The hits keep on coming, folks. They support drawing districts based on eligible voters, not pure population. Of course, that supports white rural districts and not inner city districts. They believe that districts should be geographically compact when possible. In other words, they want to be able to gerrymander. They want to be able to have districts that are 90% Democrat, 90% Democrat, put all the Democrats in a few districts, and then make all the other ones 60% white Republicans. And that's what Texas has done very well. And that's why they have 2/3 or 3/4 guaranteed Republican congressional seats when the state's like 52-48. It's very narrow division. They want an aggressive war on terrorism, and they specifically call it out, including radical Islamic terrorists. Of course, the FBI just came out with some data that white nationalist terrorism it was roughly twice as much as Islamic terrorism internal to America. They don't call that out. They don't want any amnesty for immigration. Anybody who's in the country illegally should not have a legal status. So any of these, like what we're going to have to do if we're ever going to fix immigration policies, they want to make not possible. This is impressive. They want to prohibit a Palestinian state within the historical borders of Israel. I'm quoting, as it would jeopardize Israel's security and it would force Israel to give up the land that God gave to the Jewish people as referenced in Genesis. So the first book of the Bible drew the map that Israel should have today. And they basically want to codify permanent strife in the Holy Lands in Israel and Palestine and never allow that conflict to be solved because it was in the book of Genesis. They want to withdraw from the United Nations. And so that'll really help America influence the world. And this is more important than anything. And this is something that we need to acknowledge. And I should have led with this because this is the most important litmus test. If you're listening to any candidate for office in 2022 midterms or 2024, there's one question that is the litmus test, go, no go. And that is, were the 2020 elections valid or did Joe Biden steal the election? The Texas GOP says, I'll quote, "We reject the certified results of the 2020 presidential election, and we hold that acting President Joseph Robinette Biden Jr. was not legitimately elected by the people of the United States." And then they also say, whereas all gun control is a violation of the Second Amendment, our God-given right. Obviously, God was a big fan of small arms. If you read the Bible, Jesus was a big fan of Peter chopping off the guard's ear. You know, he was a big fan of carrying swords. I'm being facetious. All gun control is a violation of the Second Amendment, and they explicitly say the 2020 election was stolen. So that is a direct threat to democracy. It is fanning the flames of insurrection. It fanned the flames of insurrection on January 6th. The Texas Republican Party is keeping those flames going. And it's just something that needs to be, I don't even know what the word is, recognized, combated, and just done away with. This nonsense that 2020 election was not legitimate. What the Republican Party should have done is said, holy crap, we just got our butts kicked. 7 million plus more people voted for Biden than voted for Trump. Why don't we change what we're doing? Clearly, we're not reaching out to the American people. Instead, they've doubled down on lies. And this is a party that is founded, their foundation is sand because their foundation is lies. Well, that's enough for now. Like I said, if our choice is between the Democrat Party of Joe Biden and this nonsense of the Texas GOP, we're screwed. America cannot thrive with these two choices. Texas deserves better. America deserves better. And we have to take action to make that happen. I don't know how that's going to happen. I don't feel that the Republican Party is salvageable. Would you try and salvage the Ku Klux Klan? Would you try and say, hey guys, I know you had some issues, but we're going to make you into the Lions or the Rotary Club. We'll make you into a civil organization. They've just gone so far off the deep end. I don't think they're salvageable, but America needs, and I want as a voter, a legitimate choice that has legitimate, moderate, or even conservative views, but doesn't take all of these extreme. They want to create the caliphate of Texas. And it makes me sick as a Christian and as somebody who has been supportive of Republicans in the past. It's something important for America. So thank you guys for listening to my monologue about this. It's important. Take action, demand that your congressman become a reasonable human. And let's think about, do we need a third party or what? Because we need to do something. Thanks for watching Down to Earth or listening to it or subscribing. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe, give me a rating, and we'll be back again next week. Thanks.